Is this the Last Supper? The Prime Minister calls Cabinet to dinner.
The Prime Minister under real pressure. Malcolm Turnbull arrives for a crisis Cabinet meeting.
Ministers are having what they're describing as a working dinner inside the Cabinet room.
A backbench revolt fanned by Malcolm Turnbull's predecessor, Tony Abbott.
Now, is all of this going to be enough to win over the internal critics? Plainly, no.
Senior Cabinet ministers are hosing down speculation that the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's leadership is under threat.
Sunday, August 19. Spring was on its way, but Canberra was slipping back into the killing season. Prime Minister Turnbull had summoned his cabinet to rework his signature energy policy, the National Energy Guarantee, hoping to head off a Conservative revolt.
Well, the meeting was moved because of the media. It would have been a case where they were sitting outside the lodge, packs of cameras, lights, and everyone coming in, and it was thought, I'm sure that was a bit too dramatic and invasive, if you like, so it was decided that the dinner would happen here at Parliament House.
I think by Sunday it was abundantly clear that it was coming, and the Prime Minister tried to forestall it by bowing before his enemies on the National Energy Guarantee, and his enemies were rolling over the top of him.
So there was a lot of tension simmering about the NEG, there's no doubt about that, but things happened very, very quickly and very unexpectedly.
The scene for the showdown had been set the previous morning with a strategic leak to Saturday's Daily Telegraph, a paper known for its antagonism to Turnbull. The telly's exclusive reported Peter Dutton was about to challenge for the Prime Ministership. Dutton denied it, tweeting, "The Prime Minister has my support."
There were a report that the potential alternative to the Prime Minister could be Peter Dutton, and there was a period for 24 hours where Peter didn't refute that. I think when he came out, by the time it's been out there for 24 hours, it sparked a bushfire, and we now know what the results are.
If you can read the Canberra tea leaves, that was a very nuanced statement of support for the Prime Minister. And so it was clear, I think, to everyone at that point that this push was real and it was on and it would accelerate.
Turnbull's revamped energy policy included supporting investment in new coal-fired power stations, penalties for power companies that overcharged, and a guarantee that the 26% emissions reduction target could not be increased if it would cause power prices to rise. But the attempt at appeasement failed.
Well, good morning, everyone. Now, today we're going to announce a range of new measures that will drive down the cost of energy for Australian families and businesses. The National Energy Guarantee remains the government's policy, but if a relatively small number of people are not prepared to vote with the government on a measure, then it won't get passed.
But here's a man who said once, any party that doesn't support me on emissions trading, I don't want to lead. And then he rolls over on the NEG, he rolls over on this. And I think if he'd said, do a Gough Whitlam and a crash would crash through, I'd do it my way or not at all, because as he tried to bend to accommodate the destruction of the Abbott world and the Conservative right, I think he lost some of his cred and a lot of his soul.
Behind the scenes, Peter Dutton and his supporters were working the phones, building support for a coup, and portraying the compromise as evidence Turnbull didn't stand for anything.
What I think we want to know is where are this Prime Minister's convictions? What are his convictions? Now, we always thought he was convicted on climate change issues. I think he probably still is, and it was a conversion of convenience this morning.
The turning point was a point of revenge from people who fundamentally had no truck or had little truck with what Malcolm had to offer.
My overriding thought was, oh, please, not again. You know, it's 9 months from an election. There's elections here in Victoria, New South Wales. I couldn't believe that the party would turn on itself again.
On Tuesday morning, as Liberal MPs arrived for their weekly party meeting, rumours of a challenge were swirling.
Look, I'm fine, but there's a party room today, so nothing to say here.
Right. Is Tony Abbott a wrecker?
No.
Time for Malcolm Turnbull to go.
No, look, that's something for the Liberal Party. I'll leave it up to them, and I don't think it'll. And I know how this place smells, and it doesn't smell like that's going to happen.
If you want cabinet ministers to come up to the press gallery and do media, you know, this way of kind of mugging them in the corridors is not really a good practice professionally.
By the end of the day, you're going to have so much to report on. So will that be a change then? Take care,
Turnbull had already made the decision to call a leadership spill, hoping to outflank his enemies.
I walked to the party room with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister told me what he was going to do, asked my opinion, and I thought it was a good idea because by that time there'd been all that rumour and innuendo around reports that people were actively lobbying against the Prime Minister. And, you know, for fear of it continuing, if that was the case, the Prime Minister took the decision that he should call it to a head, which he did, and I think it was the right decision.
It came as a surprise. The Prime Minister was the one that actually called the spill on. He's the one that stepped aside and called a vote.
I got into the party room slightly late, about 5-7 minutes. When I walked in, I just saw a vacant table and this uneary quietness in the party room. And so I hobbled to my chair, said to my colleague Warren Edge, what's going on? And he just said, the Prime Minister spilled the positions. And I said, what for?
The whip comes in, the whip says, you know, who would like to stand for the leader of the Liberal Party, which then becomes the leader of the coalition, and which then becomes the Prime Minister of the nation. Malcolm Turnbull stood up, and Peter Dutton also stood up.
People, I think, would have liked to have said some things and perhaps aired their concerns. That's the sense that I got. I know that around where I was sitting, there were people who did want to say things, and it was a very clinical, no, we're going to take a vote.
I thought there'd be a few people issuing a bit of a protest vote on various issues, but when there was, like, at least 10 cabinet members, 10 members of the executive that actually voted against the Prime Minister, that came as a great surprise to me.
Oh, good morning. The Prime Minister called a ballot in the Liberal Party room, and I conducted a ballot with my whips. The result of that ballot was Malcolm Turnbull was elected leader of the Liberal Party by a margin of 48 votes to 35, with Peter Dutton as the other candidate.
Was it orderly?
Orderly.
It is always orderly in our party room.
Absolutely.
Well, good afternoon. Our job here in this building and as the government is to deliver for the Australian people. They're the people we work for, 25 million Australians. What I say is exactly what I said to them, that we need, to all of my colleagues, that we are united, we are able as a team to deliver the great results, continue to deliver the great results that we have for all Australians.
Did Malcolm Turnbull make a mistake, do you think, calling a spill?
Let me answer it this way. If I'd been in that situation, I wouldn't have called a spill. I would have waited until I had been tested. But that's my approach. The Prime Minister probably took the notion, and I'm only guessing here, that he wanted to clear the air and allow the party room to get this out of their system.
The result was what I feared it would be. And I thought, if that's the case, that gave, Peter's group the ability to, more aggressively and openly get out there and lobby.
And Turnbull used the advantage he has, which is the advantage of incumbency. He spilled the leadership and he prevailed in that contest. But unfortunately for him, the Dutton forces, from a standing start, netted a vote in the 30s. And when that occurs, the history of this building shows you that a leader is dead, is a dead man walking.
Malcolm Turnbull's political miscalculations began on the day he seized the leadership 3 years ago.
Well, thank you very much. A little while ago, I met with the Prime Minister and advised him that I would be challenging him for the leadership of the Liberal Party. The one thing that is clear about our current situation is the trajectory. We have lost 30 news polls in a row. It is clear that the people have made up their mind about Mr Abbott's leadership.
The argument has been put that the Prime Minister set himself a KPI of 30 news polls.
But that's come back to haunt him, because certainly Tony Abbott made sure that news polls were mentioned at different times as a benchmark towards achieving the same outcome that he'd achieved.
There'll be no wrecking, no undermining and no sniping. I've never leaked or backgrounded against anyone, and I certainly won't start now.
Tony Abbott's pledge belied a seething anger he would continue to nurse.
I always will.
The party room made a decision in relation to Tony, and I think that there are some unresolved issues following that, and certainly Tony has been very active in maintaining a degree of agitation about his position, and I think that that has continued to accumulate. For Tony, this is unfinished business, and he's got his agenda. It's now become a very complex situation. Of all the leadership challenges that we've seen, I think this is the most complex of all of them.
It's ambition. I mean, politics, right back to Roman times. You can go to the kings and queens in the Middle Ages, you can go to Roman times, you can go to anywhere. Do you think that human nature has changed that much? It's called ambition, it's called ego, it's how it works.
We saw through the Gillard-Rudd years the bitterness that follows from changing the Prime Minister in the party room, and in the case of the Liberal Party, the same sort of thing has happened. So there is, amongst those who are losers in these situations, perhaps one could say inevitably, a high degree of bitterness, and that can in turn lead to acts of attempted revenge.
Everyone blames Tony, and I understand that, but it goes back to when Tony defeated Malcolm Turnbull in opposition by one vote, and that lay the seeds to this continuing hostility between them both. So they're both responsible.
Colleagues, welcome back. Welcome back to government. Welcome back to 3 years of serving the Australian people as a government.
After the turmoil of Abbott's prime ministership, there were high hopes for Turnbull.
When he rolled Tony Abbott, there was a genuine feeling of excitement in this country. He not only looked like a Prime Minister, he sounded like a Prime Minister, behaved like a Prime Minister, and he had some great ideas. If he would only have been, I get this from everybody, if he'd only been the real Malcolm Turnbull, he might still be there today. But as he rolled over on things, you know, he rolled and he rolled, and he started saying, what do you still stand for?
The engine room, genuinely, the fastest growing party.
Within his party, Turnbull was always an outsider.
We're not run by factions. We're not run by, well, you may dispute that, but I have to tell you from experience, we are not run by factions.
The Conservatives never accepted that he was a true Liberal in the mould of Menzies and Howard.
Because somebody who's been in the Liberal Party for a long time and been involved in politics for a long time, I've watched us be a very successful government, and I think that when we've been successful, it's because we've had the two wings of the party, the moderate wing and the Conservative wing. And certainly during the Howard years, we saw that working very, very well. Mr Howard had this ability to bring policy and politics together with a very good understanding, a very good grounding of the Liberal Party. We haven't had a Prime Minister since Mr Howard who has been a creature of the party and who has understood the party like Mr Howard did. So therefore, I think that is very important, and that's part of the reason why I think that we are where we are.
If you're talking about a fatal flaw, Malcolm Turnbull is really inextricably linked with a lot of issues that are really signature issues of the left, that the right or the Conservatives would start to say enough is enough. And, that's really what has happened.
The last thing you want to do, Mr Harborside Mansion, is look like you don't know and you're not welcome.
Many in the party were suspicious of the multi-millionaire merchant banker.
Everyone's entitled to their commentary. I'm focused on jobs and growth for all Australians.
And the Prime Minister's from the seat of Vaucluse. That's his, or Wentworth, Vaucluse. We're a very, very, very broad church. The base of the Liberal Party is a very conservative. It is a very conservative base that we have in the Liberal Party. And it's fair to say, I think the Prime Minister would be the first to admit, he said he's more to the centre than perhaps the base of the party is.
I think he has done and delivered some very, very important policies to keep our party together and to be consistent with our conservative and liberal values. But clearly for some that was not enough.
Good to see you.
It's 9 months ago since Malcolm Turnbull assassinated Tony Abbott, promising only one thing, that he would do better than Tony Abbott at the polls.
Prime Minister, do you realise though you've lost the election? Have you lost the mandate to govern?
In July 2016, another political misstep saw the Turnbull government scrape back into office with a one-seat majority.
We can have every confidence that we will form a coalition majority government in the next parliament.
And for a variety of reasons, political judgments, who knows, Malcolm didn't go early when he would have won a resounding majority, and I think political history would have been different. He went full term. He had a very long election campaign, probably a mistake. And anyway, the result was that at a double dissolution, he lost a lot of his authority, because when you've got a majority of 1 in the lower house and minus 10 or minus 12 or whatever in the Senate, it makes it fundamentally difficult.
Turnbull's refusal to return Abbott and his allies to the front bench fuelled the anger of the former Prime Minister and his fellow Conservatives.
So you're not ruling it out, Prime Minister? You're not ruling out returning Prime Minister Tony Abbott to the front bench?
The ministry will be the same after this election as it is now. We've lost a number of ministers ministers have not been returned. You're right. But I'm not proposing to bring back any particular individuals.
I mean, one of the roles of leadership is to actually bring people together. And the Liberal Party is a broad church. And therefore you have to bring around you people with ability. You've got to put people of different views together to actually put together the vision and the strategy to deliver the vision. You can't be all of one mould.
Well, I don't think Tony Abbott mindset was the mindset of playing in the team led by Malcolm Turnbull, in all honesty. So I'm not sure that it was a mistake to exclude him from the cabinet, but, who knows.
His slender majority would leave Turnbull on a permanent knife's edge.
When we fight for marriage...
The debate over same-sex marriage exposed the government's divisions.
And I say to you, if you don't like same-sex marriage, vote no.
I'm a supporter of same-sex marriage, and I'll be voting yes.
Turnbull agreed to Peter Dutton's plan for a postal vote. It delivered a decisive victory for marriage equality, but failed to pacify his critics.
The same-sex issue, I think, divided the Liberal Party a lot, and certainly from a Conservative base, irrespective now of whatever the vote may or may not have been nationally. The reality is that I'm talking about I'm talking about the party and where the party is at the moment and where our support base is. So we've seen a range of issues pertinent to religious freedom. We've seen issues pertinent to energy. We've seen a range of things where there is a difference of opinion. And so therefore, those have, in the more volatile atmospherics of a post-Abbott situation, have amplified, I think, to create a greater perception amongst our base that the party is moving more to the left.
I accept, but some of the more conservative people within the party, both parliamentary and organisational, didn't see that as a good end point or an end point at all, and felt that that was another reason to be less supportive of the Prime Minister than they should have been. I frankly think that particular criticism is just abject rubbish.
Turnbull found himself in an endless political tug-of-war. On issue after issue, he would compromise to appease the Conservatives, only to steadily alienate his supporters.
I think part of the price of Malcolm winning the Prime Ministership was some degree of selling his soul, if you like, to the National Party and the Conservative wing. So I think for all the time, really, that he's been there, he's been, or certainly since the last election, he's been wedged not just from one side, but from both sides. So he's criticised for not being left enough, and he's criticised for not being right enough, and that's a very, very hard place from which to function.
Because he had Abbott sniping at him from the right all the time and trying to wedge him, he started to lose the moderates in the Liberal Party. And there's a large chunk of moderates. I mean, I know they dismiss them as the doctors' wives, but they are there, and they are decent, honourable, intelligent people. And they could see that the Turnbull they thought they had got to lead them was being dragged further and further to the right as conciliation.
The level of public disenchantment with the major parties, the lack of confidence in our political process, and the concern about the direction of our nation is very, very strong.
Throughout 2017, the already toxic relationship between Turnbull and the Conservatives worsened, with Cory Bernardi quitting the Liberal Party and Abbott taking pot shots from the backbench.
Is Tony Abbott being helpful?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the gentleman you described, referred to, but let me just say this about the budget.
Well, certainly Tony has contributed to a degree of intense debate, if I can put it in those terms. But this is a much more volatile political situation than it used to be. And certainly Tony has very effectively appealed to the Conservative base of the Liberal Party. And I'm not apportioning blame either way. I think that there is a sense by some in the party that there is unfinished business, and this is now manifesting itself in the degree of instability that we are now seeing.
I think what Tony has done is really regrettable, lamentable. He has destabilised, he has really done everything he could to make things as difficult as possible for Malcolm Turnbull.
The day I became president about 13, 14 months ago, I said something totally banal. Disunity's death. If we can't get our act together, we're going to lose. Well, that wasn't a great insight, and it's not a great insight today, but it's obviously true.
The relentless infighting, like a repeat of the Rudd-Gillard years, left many in and outside Parliament with a sense of despair.
This is both sides of politics. I think people are really disappointed. They see Canberra as people concerned about power plays, their own egos, about their own careers, and about what they want to achieve for themselves. There's lots of things that we've done very well, but we get consumed all the time, and have been for 10 years on both sides of politics, about this leadership play, which is, I think, demeaning the institution of our democracy.
There's been a concerted, coordinated campaign between a very, very small number of members of the Federal Parliamentary Liberal Party and, frankly, a pretty small number of media that are concentrated in a handful of outlets or newspapers. And I think in my 30 or 40 years in public life, I don't remember a more blatant media campaign which didn't just say, oh, well, the Prime Minister didn't do this well, but actually said, well, this other bloke should still be the leader.
Since the financial crisis, however,
Turnbull's relationship with his coalition partner, the Nationals, was also fraying. There was deep anger over his refusal to call a royal commission into the banking sector, until he did so in a belated about-face.
Cabinet has met this morning and is determined that the only way we can give all Australians a greater degree of assurance about the financial system is through a royal commission into misconduct into the financial services industry.
It took, a number of National Party backbenchers to drag the Prime Minister kicking and screaming to this decision.
For some in the Nationals, Turnbull's public chastising of Barnaby Joyce over his marriage breakup was beyond the pale.
Barnaby made a shocking error of judgment in having an affair with a young woman working in his office. In doing so, he has set off a world of woe for those women and appalled all of us.
Keep going, guys.
The conflict left another burned enemy smouldering on the backbench.
In regards to comments by the Prime Minister yesterday at his press conference, I have to say that in many instances they caused further harm. I believe they were in many instances inept and most definitely in many instances unnecessary.
There were reports that you said of Malcolm Turnbull words to the effect of, that he will regret having both Tony Abbott and yourself on the backbench.
No, well, I've always said when I was the deputy, the role of the deputy is to protect the leader, and I always believe that. The role of the Deputy Prime Minister is to protect the Prime Minister, and I think I live by that creed, and if there was any regret, it's that I do think I was an able person in doing that, and so if there's any regrets, and it's a right question for you to ask, is that I think you can see what happens if you need that person.
Do you trust him?
Look, I think that they're all politicians in here. Bill Shorten, Malcolm Turnbull, they're all politicians, right? And in the game of politics, it's nefarious by nature. So the question really should be, do you completely trust any politician? To which my answer is no.
Now, 28 consecutive news polls.
As the polls continued to slide, Turnbull's detractors waited with seeming glee for the landmark 30th negative news poll.
And I guess if he fails the test, it'll be the Prime Minister who will have to explain why the test was right for one and not right for the other. It'll be up to him to tell us all why the test doesn't apply in his case.
Is it fair, though, to have set that benchmark in 2015 and then not want to address it now?
Well, I can assure you I've addressed it. I mean, I regret making those remarks at the time, making the remarks about 30 news polls at the time. But what I promised to do was to provide economic leadership and traditional cabinet government, and I've done both.
But that was the KPI that he seemed. So those people who have been agitating have been saying, well, look, this is the situation. We're getting, we've gone beyond the 30, we've gone 31, 32 and counting. And so those people who have been working and moving and agitating have continued along that line. As I said, I think this has been something that's been building, and it's been building over a period of time. And I think once it got to that number, that's when I think the seriousness of the situation for those who have been working towards this objective, I think that's when it came into play.
It plays into what I think is a huge problem with the Australian polity, and that is that the political class have become obsessed with opinion polls. I mean, even 2 years out from an election, they're obsessed with whether they're winning or losing in the news poll every fortnight, or their, Fairfax Ipsos poll, it's just less frequent. They're just obsessed with this. And a long way out from an election, honestly, it doesn't really matter what the polls say.
On July 28, the government faced a series of polls that really mattered.
So hopefully I can count on your support at the election.
The Super Saturday by-elections, called after 4 MPs were declared ineligible by the High Court and another resigned for family reasons.
11,000 workers have just had their penalty rates cut.
Thanks very much.
I always had great concerns with that, having those by-elections, that we might somehow create some false hope that we'd win. Like, no government had won a by-election for a century, over a century, and they were some unique special circumstances where the sitting member was tried for treason or something like that. So it's almost impossible for a sitting government to expect it to win a by-election. So I think the false hope that we created only set us up for a big fall.
Well, it certainly wasn't 50-50 in that bar. I think
in another era of judgment, Turnbull had cast the critical poll in the seat of Longman in Queensland as a leadership contest between himself and Labor leader Bill Shorten.
Well, the Longman by-election is obviously a test of the candidates, test of the parties, but really it is about deciding for the people of Longman to decide whether they want to vote for Bill Shorten and his higher taxes, fewer jobs, lower wages, less economic growth. The head-up, the contest, is between me and Bill Shorten as the Prime Minister and the opposition leader.
What about Malcolm Turnbull saying it was a test of his and Bill Shorten's leadership? Was that a mistake?
Yeah, I think clearly a mistake.
I was always getting told that Longman wasn't a chance for us. So I was always surprised that we were talking it up, especially as we got closer to the day. I wasn't privy to polling, but anyone that I knew was saying, look, we're not a chance in Longman. We think we have a bit of a chance in Braddon, but Longman's out of the game. So I think maybe there was some bad and building of expectations in Longman that didn't come to fruition.
Is there a bit of a leadership test for both Bill Shorten and Malcolm Turnbull?
Oh, well, there's no question that Anthony...
For Peter Dutton and his Queensland colleagues, the Longman by-election would be a turning point.
So is Malcolm Turnbull safe if we lose Longman today?
Malcolm Turnbull's absolutely safe. I mean, you would expect Labor to be miles ahead in the polls. It's been obviously 90 years since the government's had any prospect of taking a seat from the opposition in a by-election.
Vote for veterans and vote for job cuts. Come on, Mr Dutton, give the voters of Longman a good scoop today that you're the next Prime Minister of Australia. Mr Dutton, give the good voters of Longman the scoop.
The results were a disaster. The Liberal vote in Longman dropped by close to 10%. Labor secured a swing of 4.5%.
It's been a tough campaign. It's had our ups and our downs. But tonight we've had 2 great wins already, and I'm hearing pretty good things from Western Australia as well.
The One Nation vote went up to 16%, and Pauline Hanson wasn't even there.
Wake-up call. Wake up, wake up. Remember, more people voted for a lady who was on holidays in the Irish Sea. She wasn't even there. And 16% voted for her. And we got a vote in the 20s, and the Labor Party got a vote in the 30s. It's not just a lesson for us, it's a lesson for the Labor Party. It's a lesson for the political system. People are leaving you.
We are bleeding votes to the right. That's obvious where it's happening. And of course, once those votes bleed to the right, we do not have control over where they go. So what is vitally important for us is to ensure that those votes don't go to other small right-wing parties like One Nation or others.
But Prime Minister, you look at these results and it's difficult to escape the conclusion that you're a lame duck Prime Minister marching towards defeat sometime in the middle of next year.
There's no absolutely
the underdog now.
There's no basis for saying that at all. This was a conventional swing in one electorate.
You said that this by-election contest was about leadership, in which case they haven't endorsed your leadership.
That is not correct. The by-elections are about many issues. They're about the candidates, they're about local issues, they're about national policies, they're about national leaders.
Okay, well, I think we have to look to win the next election. We've got to be able to win in Queensland. We've got about 7 or 8 very marginal seats in Queensland that would fall with a few percent. So the first of all, we've got to hold Queensland.
Obviously, with Longman, I think there was a lot of concern that the primary vote was not as high as it should have been, but governments very rarely win by-elections, and I felt that really the concern of the Queenslanders was unnecessary. We could have very quickly rebuilt after Longman, but clearly others felt differently.
Those less than favourable by-election results were the product of a weak party organisation. The Liberal Party is a moribund organisation. It's a shell of an organisation. It has got a membership that nationally totals probably no more than 35 or 40,000.
I think the mistake was more in our lack of political smarts in setting expectations. I mean, we had polling, and the polling told us that our vote was soft, yet virtually every published media poll indicated it was line ball. So we knew or had a fairly good idea that in fact that wasn't the case. And so, yeah, of course, the Longman outcome was, was a peg, a spur, if you like, to those who wanted to tear the government and more particularly the Prime Minister down.
Within weeks, the government was imploding.
Certainly in the lead up to the party room, it became much more apparent that there was a growing level of restlessness. Peter's own admission on media indicated that he was giving serious consideration to a leadership challenge at some point. And it's fundamentally trundled forward from there.
If you told me 5 years ago being part of a Praetorian Guard to protect the Prime Minister, I would have thought you were joking, but that's what's ended up being the case.
Well, for me, and I think for others, there's been an atmosphere of disbelief, of like, what is going on? All leadership challenges have that. I think this one probably more than ever. I think this one was maybe like the first time Rudd was deposed, was unpredicted, and I think there's a feeling of disbelief.
It's not every day that a sitting Prime Minister throws his leadership on the line as Malcolm Turnbull did here. Malcolm Turnbull securing 48 votes to Peter Dutton's 35. And there is much to flow from that result.
Well, I think everyone was in shock. I think the die were cast, irrespective of what the Prime Minister did in that meeting on the Tuesday. But it effectively, his idea was to put an end to it. It did the exact reverse.
The reality is, Prime Minister, you have 35 people behind you who this morning voted not to have you as their leader. And I predict that number will get larger.
This is not a cathedral, it's not a monastery, it's not a daycare centre, this is Parliament House. By its very nature, it has a nefarious aspect. And to deny that is to lie, which means you're not trustworthy. So I'm telling you the truth, that in any politician, there is, in the essence of survival, there is basically an essence of having to work in that sort of dark art of politics. And if you were completely transparent, completely honest, you won't survive here.
A Prime Minister without power and without policy. That's how Malcolm Turnbull has been described today after he narrowly survived a leadership vote against his Home Affairs Minister.
the iron laws of arithmetic, Peter Dutton says when the numbers add up for him, he's coming to get your job. How do you respond?
Well, it's we had a ballot earlier this week, as you know. So I think yesterday, in fact. So the iron laws of arithmetic confirmed my leadership of the Liberal Party.
Can you rule out having any leadership ambitions?
Me?
Yep.
This is my leader.
There you go.
And I'm ambitious for him.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, ScoMo.
The Prime Minister's political crisis is worsening following a challenge to his leadership. A total of 7 frontbenchers have offered their resignations.
Malcolm Turnbull may have gone into the party room believing he could shut the insurgency down. Instead, it set off 4 days of chaos.
9 frontbenchers who supported Peter Dutton's leadership challenge have tendered their resignations.
One by one, Peter Dutton's Conservative backers resigned from the front bench, while behind the scenes, Dutton escalated his campaign.
I lost the ballot today, I accept the outcome, and for me, I just want to be in a position now to support the government, make sure that we win.
So now, no sniping, no undermining?
No sniping, no undermining, and you know, I can relax a little bit, which is good.
Well, it's just after 8 o'clock on Wednesday evening here in Parliament House. There's a petition that has gone around that's been signed by several members, I'm not sure how many, requesting a special party room meeting to decide the leadership. It doesn't need any particular number of signatures. That's the party room rules. There's nothing actually written down. It's at the Prime Minister's discretion. But for there to be a change of leader, it will require 43 votes in the party room if and when a special party room meeting is held.
There was a very chaotic night in Parliament House on Wednesday night. People were going in and out of Malcolm Turnbull's office for much of Wednesday night as this unfolded. Now, versions of what happened in those various meetings on Wednesday night vary depending on who you speak to. One version of events has Matthias Cormann on Wednesday night making his position abundantly clear to the Prime Minister on Wednesday night and offering to resign, and Malcolm Turnbull refusing to accept that resignation. Another version is more shaded, that Matthias Cormann didn't make his position entirely known to the Prime Minister. He made it known to the Treasurer, who then made it known to the Prime Minister, and then all kinds of frenzied negotiations ensued.
And I have to demonstrate my disappointment and disgust at what's been going on in Australian politics over 10 years. I will not be going to the coalition party room. I will sit on the crossbench, support the government in supply and not support no confidence motion.
Earlier this morning, I called the Prime Minister to advise him that it was my judgment that the majority of the party room no longer supported his leadership. As such, I asked him to convene a meeting of the Liberal Party at which I would challenge for the leadership of the Parliamentary Liberal Party. Thank you very much.
What you've got to understand about Parliament House, for those that haven't been here, is that the offices, there are long corridors and it's very easy to work out who's coming in and out of offices, and there are thousands of people that work in this building on a daily basis. And as a result, rumour and innuendo quite often flies around the place based on who's with who at a coffee shop or coming out of an office, going into an office.
Morning, everyone. It's with great sadness and a heavy heart that we went to see the Prime Minister yesterday afternoon to advise him that in our judgment he no longer enjoyed the support of a majority of members in the Liberal Party party room, and that it was in the best interest.
I felt a great sense of despair when I saw Michaelia, Matthias and Mitch come out into the courtyard and make those statements and do that press conference.
He looked quite anguished when he's announcing that he and Fifield and Cash had decided to tap the PM on the shoulder. Because only an hour before he went to see the PM, he was out in the courtyard saying, I've been loyal to Prime Minister Turnbull and will remain loyal, and then bingo, it's over.
It was probably a turning point. It was a critical turning point because you see somebody who stands beside a Prime Minister, commits to supporting the Prime Minister, and then within a very short period of time comes forward and says, that they have lost confidence in the Prime Minister.
Further meeting with the Prime Minister this morning.
Cormann said they were switching sides because Turnbull no longer had majority support. But in fact, it was their move that would cost him the leadership.
Rome is officially burning when Matthias Cormann has abandoned the Prime Minister. But even that wasn't enough over the course of Thursday. I'm told by multiple sources that Matthias Cormann and Michaelia Cash walked that petition from office to office in an effort to try and summon the signatures to force this bill, and even then people hesitated.
How can you say that he's a good Prime Minister?
I had a number of conversations with the Peter Dutton camp. I'm not going to talk about those conversations other than to say there was a suggestion floated that I might obtain a ministry, and I couldn't take that deal because I felt my constituents would be disgusted in me if I had taken that deal and switched sides to Peter Dutton. It would not have been the right thing to do. It would have been treacherous of me, frankly, to take that deal.
So I've had 3 female, 1 senator and 2 members of the House, complain to me that they felt stood over in trying to sign a letter which has now been asked for by the Prime Minister. And, you know, that's clearly not acceptable. Those 3 women didn't sign the letter, but the term they used was, we were stood over.
The Leader of the House.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
This is extraordinary. What is happening right now is the government have decided that this place has fallen apart so completely that they are dissolving the Parliament for the day entirely. Order.
With the government completely consumed by the leadership turmoil, the House of Representatives was adjourned.
The House stands adjourned until Monday, 10 September 2018 at 10 a.m.
Malcolm Turnbull knew his leadership was over, but he wasn't going quietly.
Well, good to welcome you into the courtyard here. Now, Australians will be rightly appalled by what they're witnessing in their nation's parliament today and in the course of this week. The reality is that a minority in the party room, supported by others outside the parliament, have sought to bully, intimidate others into making this change of leadership that they're seeking. It's been described by many people, including those who feel they cannot resist it, as a form of madness.
The Prime Minister, who has not made a habit in the time he's occupied the office of staring down his enemies, his whole inclination as Prime Minister has been to coddle his enemies, to make peace with his enemies, to try and find a middle ground with his enemies. By the end of the week, the Prime Minister found his fight, and we saw the Prime Minister appear in his own courtyard and essentially lay out the terms of his own execution. And they were extraordinary terms. It was the equivalent of burning the barn, salting the plain, and poisoning the waterholes.
So I now await a letter with the signatures of a majority of the party room, if I receive, which is 43. If I receive that, then I will convene a new party room meeting.
Mr Turnbull, if you do step aside tomorrow, if the bill is moved, will you remain in the Parliament until the end of the term?
No, I've made it very clear that I believe that former Prime Ministers are best out of the Parliament, and I don't think there's much evidence to suggest that that conclusion is correct. So it's not correct.
I've been in this building for 22 years. I've covered every leadership challenge over the past decade. I have never seen one quite like this. It has been mad. The atmosphere around the building has been unhinged. I don't invoke these words lightly. There has been behind-the-scenes arm-twisting, bullying of all types. People are people are incoherent. People are there's very poor organisation. The Liberal Party doesn't have the institutional discipline of the Labor Party to sort of drive these terrible transactions through in a clean, clear way. So we've seen absolute chaos behind the scenes for several days.
If the motion is carried, I will...
It's got more frantic since the Prime Minister stood to his feet and announced that if he's furnished with a letter that has 43 signatures, he'll call a party room meeting, and if there's a spill motion moved and he's not successful in defeating that, he would not recontest the position.
Mr Dutton, are you expecting a meeting?
Dutton's supporters were spreading the word that he had the numbers.
Going back to the point that I made earlier, we are bleeding votes to the right. That is, it's like the furniture, it's walking out the door, it's going out the door. And so for this reason, there is a view, correctly or otherwise, that a person with Conservative credentials at this point in time may have a better chance of preserving the situation.
I've had many, many emails, hundreds of emails from people expressing their view. There was an overwhelming view in my electorate that they did not want Peter Dutton as the next Prime Minister.
Turnbull's move to delay the vote was buying the moderates more time. Scott Morrison's numbers men were hard at work.
Some breaking news for you. I'm told reliably that Mitch Fifield has shifted support from Dutton now to Scott Morrison. If Mitch Fifield is now with Scott Morrison in the race, I think that's a quite significant development.
At 12:20 p.m. on Friday, the party room reconvened. Now you're about to go to the party room meeting. Presumably you'll be walking to the party room meeting with the Prime Minister.
Yes.
What's his thinking at this point?
Look, I don't know. However, I do know that he's an amazing man, and the honour of having get to not only know him but become a good mate of his is a plus that I'll enjoy for the rest of my life.
And this is the last walk, really, isn't it, for him?
Yeah, and it's sad, and it's emotional. As someone that has been a staunch supporter, protector and friend, it's bloody tough.
It was very, very tense. It was obviously unbelievable when the vote occurred and against the spill motion, and 40 people, including myself, voted against the spill motion. And had 3 people changed their vote, Malcolm Turnbull would still be our Prime Minister.
After wreaking havoc on the party, Peter Dutton's Conservative insurgency had failed.
The successful candidate was Scott Morrison.
The exact story of how Scott Morrison came through the middle is yet to be told. Turnbull was gone.
Well, good afternoon. It may surprise you on a day like this, but I remain very optimistic and positive about our nation's future. I think you all know what's happened. There was a determined insurgency from a number of people, both in the party room and sort of backed by voices, powerful voices in the media, really to bring, if not bring down the government, certainly bring down my Prime Ministership. It was extraordinary. It was described as madness by many, and I think it's difficult to describe it in any other way. In the party room meeting today, I was impressed by how many of my colleagues spoke or voted for loyalty above disloyalty. How the insurgents were not rewarded by electing Mr Dutton, for example, but instead my successor, who I wish the very best, of course.
He shattered as I think anyone in his position would be. And I'm left scratching my head saying, geez, wow, that happened really fast.
I think Australians are disgusted that we have cut down another Prime Minister. I've been in the Prime Minister's office after, of course, the vote occurred, and it's been a very sad time. There have been plenty of tears. In the party room, I had some tears. When I heard about Malcolm being such a great father and great-grandfather, that's what really got me. So it's been a very emotional and tumultuous week, and I want to apologise to the people I represent because I think we can do better than this.
This revolving door thing from the Rudd, Gillard, Rudd and then Abbott, Turnbull, out there in the real world, people are sick of it. You know, I mean, I've talked to people who voted like 3 times now and not one of their people they voted for is gone full term. I mean, John Howard's the last leader to go a full term.
Insofar as there has been chaos this week, it has been created by the wreckers. I have done everything I can to maintain the stability of government and the stability of the party. But, of course, if people are determined to wreck, then, you know, they will continue to do so.
I think half of the battle, half of the reasons why we've had this turmoil over the last decade is because we're a country without a vision. And those who are in Canberra and those who lead the organisations, the political, have got to accept responsibility for that. And what we've seen over the last week and what we saw with Rudd and Gillard and Abbott and Turnbull is a reflection of a country without direction.
The public aren't interested in all of this belly-button gazing, infighting. They don't believe it's got anything to do with the level of renewables or any sort of policy issue. It's all rubbish. It's about individuals, it's about ego, it's about greed, and the public don't like it. They didn't like it when our opponents were doing it, and they don't like it when we're doing it.